In a stunner, the Pete Carroll era is over in Seattle, at least as the head coach. I'm going to be diving in with an instant reaction here on this impromptu bonus episode of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Breaking news out of the Pacific Northwest. Pete Carroll is out as coach of the Seattle Seahawks after 14 seasons. He's expected to take an advisory role with the organization, so they're not just shoving him aside, but it was clearly time to make a change at the coaching position. So I'm going to be breaking it all down here on this bonus episode that is brought your way by PrizePicks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Now for your lead story, the only story out there here on this bonus edition of Locked On Seahawks. There had been some speculation in recent weeks, including on this podcast, about 72-year-old Pete Carroll's future in Seattle. We now have an answer what is going to happen on that front. Pete Carroll out as head coach of the Seahawks. A major bombshell dropped mid-afternoon on Wednesday. Carroll is going to be speaking with the media in a little over an hour from the VMAX. So we'll get to hear his thoughts on this crazy move. It has been more than a decade, 14 years since Pete Carroll arrived in Seattle, the most successful coach in franchise history. You just look at the numbers, 137 wins compared to 89 losses, 10 playoff appearances in 14 seasons. Of course, 2 Super Bowls, winning one of them in Super Bowl 48 against the Denver Broncos. Came up a few yards short the year after against the New England Patriots. There's no question that Pete Carroll is the most successful coach in franchise history, and I think he belongs on that Mount Rushmore for coaches in the 21st century. He's up there with the Bill Belichick's of the world, Mike Tomlin. He has been one of the best coaches, and last year I think he did a magnificent job getting this football team without Russell Wilson at the time, without Bobby Wagner, to the playoffs with a 9-8 record. But it felt like things had grown a little bit stale this season. And I think the biggest issue, we've tackled this several times in the last couple of seasons, to be quite frank, the defense just has not been up to par. Pete Carroll's known as a defensive coach, a defensive mastermind, those Legion of Boom era teams that were consistently ranked in the top 5 in scoring defense 4 straight years, first in scoring defense. Obviously, those players are no longer here in Seattle, but the Seahawks have not finished better than 11th in scoring defense in the last 7 years, and they've been in the mid-20s the last 2 years. It just felt like there was a disconnect. The league is evolving, the game is changing, and Carroll's defensive philosophies were not able to keep up with his in-house candidates that he kept promoting to the defensive coordinator position. So I think that it had reached a point where I don't know if Jody Allen presented the opportunity for Carroll to stay on board, but with an out-of-house candidate to take the defensive coordinator job, I don't know if that's how this truly played out, but I would not be surprised if that is how the meeting went down here the last few days. And looking at a statement from Jody Allen directly, she said, after thoughtful meetings and careful consideration for the best interest of the franchise, we have amicably agreed with Pete Carroll that his role will evolve from head coach to remain with the organization as an advisor. Pete is the winningest coach in Seahawks history, brought the city its first Super Bowl title, and created a tremendous impact over the past 14 years on the field and in the community. His expertise and leadership in building a championship culture will continue as an integral part of our organization moving forward. Pete will always be a beloved member of the Seahawks family. Couldn't have been better said, but I think that is the point that we had reached with Pete Carroll. Again, he is a legendary coach. That term gets thrown around a lot, but he fits the bill. One of the best coaches in the NFL all time. I think he is a future Hall of Famer, not just the fact that he won a national championship at the college level, but then he goes and wins a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. What a run it has been. But there hadn't been a playoff win since 2019. The defense not only had regressed, it was getting worse with all the money and draft picks that have been invested on that side of the ball. There were just too many issues. In the end, there just seemed to be a disconnect. And you could even see it on the field the last few weeks that it felt like, and I will say this, if that indeed is the last game that Pete Carroll coaches in the NFL, you got to see his team show the fight at the end against the Cardinals to come back and win that football game. That is what you expect to see from a Pete Carroll coach team. That's what we saw for 14 seasons. But there were some glimpses here in the second half of the season where it just felt like the players were not, I don't know if buy-in's the right set of words, but it just didn't seem like they were fully invested in what was going on. The coaching was not translating to on-the-field performance. And so at this point, the Seahawks felt like it was time with a coach that would have been the oldest coach in NFL oldest coach in NFL history to take the sidelines at 73 years of age. That would have been next year. They just reached a verdict that it was time to move on. And now that creates a really interesting dynamic here because the Seahawks have not had to hire a coach since they brought Carroll in 2010 after one rough season under the leadership of Jim Mora Jr. So this is going to be a new experience. And there's already been a few names thrown out there. The one that is getting a lot of traction right now, we've talked about it on the show. He was the defensive coordinator for the Seahawks when they made their back-to-back Super Bowls. But, of course, Dan Quinn is the name that is getting thrown around right now, all the various reports, as the main favorite. And he had a decent run with the Atlanta Falcons in 5 years as a coach. He did get them to a Super Bowl. We know that that was an infamous 28-3 meltdown, but still had a winning record in Atlanta, got to the playoffs a couple of times. I think that he is in a position where he is better to be a head. He has spent time with the Dallas Cowboys as defensive coordinator. He's worked under a different coach. And I think being in a different environment like that only expands a coach's ability. So I would be intrigued by that. You're going to hear Jim Harbaugh's name. Mike Vrabel, who was just fired yesterday by the Titans, I think is a fantastic head coach. More of a defensive-oriented coach, though. A lot of fans may want that offensive mind. Maybe you're going to look at somebody like Eric Bieniemy, who, considering circumstances in Washington, yes, they didn't win many games, but he made Sam Howell look really solid for a good portion of this season. Jacoby Brissett played well when he's had his opportunities. So Bieniemy is a coach that I think is maybe going to be on the radar. Those are some of the names I would expect. There will be a few others that will be thrown out there, but right now I would say that Dan Quinn is the favorite. Regardless, you move on from a coach like Pete Carroll. I think many of us can agree that this was probably the right time to make this move. It just felt like things had flatlined. Were you going to get to that next level with Pete Carroll as your head coach now? It was beginning to be a pessimistic feeling on that front, particularly on the defensive side of the football. But now the pressure is on Jody Allen and the front office, the rest of this ownership group. You have got to get this right. And that doesn't just mean hiring somebody internally. You've got to make sure that you hit this out of the park. You got to bring the right head coach in, and there needs to be a little bit of a change. This can't just be a status quo hiring. And I don't think this is what a lot of people are saying right now. I don't view Dan Quinn as that style of coach, again, because I've seen what he's done now in Dallas. I think he's reinvented himself to an extent. The time that he was in Atlanta as his own head coach. Pete Carroll was a failed head coach at two different stops in the NFL before this really long run of success in Seattle. So I think you can grow a lot from those experiences. So I wouldn't necessarily say that Dan Quinn is that yes man or status quo hiring, but certainly Jim Harbaugh would not be that. That would be the home run hitter. Now, he comes with plenty of controversy. He also comes with a winning pedigree. And how ironic would it be to go from Pete Carroll to Jim Harbaugh with the relationship that those two had in the field coaching against each other in college and, of course, in the NFC West in the glory years of that 49ers Seahawks rivalry. You're going to hear a bunch of other names out there, but regardless of what the Seahawks do, they can't rush into a decision here. You can't just rush to name Dan Quinn your coach without looking, and league rules won't allow him to do this either, but you have got to make sure no stone is left unturned because this is a crucial hiring, and if you don't get this right, it could set the organization back for many years to come. So this is now a critical hiring process for the Seahawks. We are going to continue to dive in the next several episodes into possible candidates. We'll be looking back at the Pete Carroll era, but that's what I'm going to be doing next. I'm going to discuss some of my favorite moments. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit it into a 10-minute segment, but we're going to be discussing some of my favorite moments. And this is going to be a chance for you, our valued listeners. Many of you complain I don't look at the live chat enough, but I'm going to be checking out what your favorite memories from the Pete Carroll era are, and I'll be sharing some of those here on the show. We'll get to those here in a moment on this impromptu bonus edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch those winnings roll in. PrizePicks is really simple to play. I can make all my picks and submit entries in less than 60 seconds. And even though the playoffs are here and a lot of teams are done in the NFL with the regular season finishing, you can still do combo projections in the Specials League. You can have Steph Curry and Tyreek Hill at 14.5 3-pointers plus receptions. And PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy that your entries stay in play, even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the first half, it doesn't come back in the second half, that player gets rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform that has an insurance policy. PrizePicks is an absolute blast each week, and it's an easy way to enjoy daily fantasy without the hassle and land quick winnings. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL right now and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. You're listening to a bonus impromptu edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Some pretty big breaking news today out of the Pacific Northwest. The Pete Carroll era, at least as a coach, is officially coming to an end. After 14 seasons, the organization and the legendary coach have reached a mutual agreement to move on from him being on the sidelines. He's going to take on an advisory role, stay with the organization, but that means for the first time since 2010, there will be a different coach running the show for the Seahawks next season. And there's some candidates out there. Dan Quinn, I mentioned, being the favorite. Maybe Jim Harbaugh throws his hat into this ring. There will be some other names thrown out there. Dave Canales, who just left last year, became the Buccaneers offensive coordinator. He might be a name worth considering here with what he did in Tampa Bay, what he did with Geno Smith 2 years ago. They might be looking that direction as well. But before we really dive into the candidates, with this being an instant reaction episode, I think that it would be a bad gesture to just move on from Pete Carroll and just say, look, we're moving on to a new era. Let's talk who's going to replace him. This is not a Jim Mora Jr. type situation, and that's not taking shots at him, but this is not a coach that had one season in Seattle and it didn't work out, and then you just brush him under the rug. Let's go on to the next one. That didn't work out. You're talking about one of the best coaches all time, one of the top coaches of his era, and certainly what a personality that Pete Carroll was. This is a bittersweet day for me. I've gotten the privilege to be able to cover this Seahawks team as a beat reporter since 2018. So we're talking 6 full seasons that I got to work with Pete Carroll, and I just think that he, as great of a coach as he is, he's an even better human being, and the spirit that he brings, the energy, absolutely is contagious. There's a lot of stories that I can share about Pete Carroll. There's some from behind the scenes, but maybe the one that stands out to me the most is when I was going into the VMAC, and this was, I think it was 2 seasons ago. This was during the 2022 season. This was the first year without Russell Wilson, but I remember coming into the VMAC early, and I see this guy running up and down the stairs, and the VMAC's got a bunch of floors. Like, this is a tall building. I see this guy running up and down the stairs full speed, and then I quickly realize there's Nike Air Monarchs on. I'm like, that's Pete Carroll. This guy is 71 at the time, and he is running all of these stairs uphill. There's a reason that this guy has the energy. He's 71 going on 25. And getting to see a guy do it, I'm like, I'm in good shape, and I probably couldn't do that. And so it was just incredible to see that. I'll always remember some of the stuff that happens in press conferences. I think it was last season that he was up at the podium and randomly smacked the podium to kill a fly in the middle of an answer, and then he forgot what he was talking about. That was hilarious. I enjoyed that. And of course, on the field, you can look back at some of the memorable things that he's done as a coach on the field, all the challenge flags, whether they were going to be good or not, the timeouts that are being used up just for the heck of it. As he said, sometimes you just got to wing it. You know, those are things that sometimes drove fans nuts. But in retrospect, you know what? It made things interesting. It was fun. Having a perfect record with a ball cap on, he's going to retire with a perfect record wearing a regular ball cap. So that's something that he's going to stick with. But I remember after the playoff win over the Vikings that he was up over on the top of the locker room of the lockers. He was standing up top with the team in that famous picture. There's so many memories about Pete Carroll from this incredible run in Seattle, the best era in franchise history. And so with that being said, I want to open the floor. We don't do this a lot here on Locked On Seahawks, but I'm going to give you guys an opportunity in the chat. I want you to share your favorite memories from the Pete Carroll era. It could be something as simple as, you know, winning the Super Bowl, or it could be something that happened off the field. Whatever it is, going to be sharing some of these. As I mentioned, for me, I've got some unique perspective from being a beat reporter and getting to see some of the stuff that happens behind the scenes with Pete Carroll. But certainly an incredible character, an even better character in person than the coach. And he's one of the best coaches ever. So really looking forward to getting a chance to see what you, the 12s, have as your favorite moments from Pete Carroll's time in Seattle. So again, if you just type those up in the chat, I don't see any at this point, but tell me, what are your favorite memories of Pete Carroll? And this is a great one right here coming from Max. This is one I can't believe that I didn't mention this. Pete Carroll taking his shirt off for the DK Metcalf meeting. That is legendary. And I know that there's been some players that have made fun of that, but like, what other coach would have done that? And there's a lot of coaches that we know would never have considered doing that, but that's what Pete Carroll did. Outside the box thinker. Certainly that was exciting. Oh, this is a really good one here from Nahishi. The flip phone fall from pocket versus the challenge flag. And I forget what year that was, but that was something that everybody in the press box was laughing once we figured out what had happened there. But yeah, that was certainly a miscue with the flip phone coming out, the challenge flag not being what gets thrown instead. Elijah, this is a good one. All the locker room, can you win a game in the first quarter, locker room post-game hype speeches. I know there's been a lot of fans that have made a mockery of that over the years, but his players rallied around those cries, and seeing those videos when they were able to pull off comeback wins in the fourth quarter, seeing the animation in that locker room, how genuinely excited the players were. And obviously you're never going to have to worry about the enthusiasm of Pete Carroll in those situations, but we're always going to remember those moments as well. And there were plenty of them because this team was good at finding ways to win games late. Oh, this is another good one. If we're looking for away from the field, the Will Ferrell and Snoop Dogg connections. When Will Ferrell during the COVID era, when they were doing the virtual meetings, when he came on and he was pretending he was Greg Olsen, that is probably one of my all-time favorite Pete Carroll things off the field that he did. And he was just always looking for ways to do something different. And that's what made him such a successful coach in Seattle. Cam Schofield, the fake punt against Buffalo in 2012 during a blowout, seeing Pete fired up on the sideline after calling a fake punt up multiple scores late was hilarious. Hey, that's what they did during that time period. It's the NFL. If you want to complain about it, then stop it. And you could just see the genuine enthusiasm this guy just had oozing from his veins, and players fed off of that. And in those years when Seattle was competing for Super Bowls, it was especially good. Alex Hernandez, best moment was this past offseason, the viral clip of Pete dotting up our defense. Knew from then our defense was going to be ugly. Well, I don't know if I would have put that as one of the best moments for Pete Carroll, but certainly fans have different perspectives on that. Looking at some of our other ones on here. Observer 777, the look on Pete's face after Russell threw that interception during the second Super Bowl, the look of I screwed up big time, or maybe he screwed up big time as well. That certainly is a look that has been shared as a meme more than 100 times over the years by people. Anthony Harris, the basketball shooting contest between players. I mean, heck, I know for people like Mike Dugar in the beat room, always wanted to come in every day and make sure you got a few shots up on that hoop that was in the auditorium room. That was certainly something that players always mentioned as being one of their favorite things about Pete Carroll. And we got time for a few more here. We got this from Seahawks House. Mic'd up conversations with the refs. Yeah, we're going to miss that. I don't know that there were very many coaches, if any, that when you had a chance to get Pete Carroll mic'd up during games, you could hear him say some of the funny stuff that came out, how serious he took it, the anger that you didn't think he had at times. Yeah, those are going to be moments that I think everybody is going to miss. Thomas Rose, the fake field goal with John Ryan. Who can forget the John Ryan face? You can search it on Google when he's throwing the pass and he's kind of like this going on, and Pete Carroll on the sideline getting fired up with that one. Yeah, absolutely. This is a tough day for fans. There's no question about it. And I guess this would be my best way to sum up this episode. And we're going to have a lot more opportunities here in coming days to reflect on Pete Carroll's tenure. Look forward to what's next. That's going to be a big thing here in upcoming days and weeks for the Seahawks. Who's going to be replacing him as the head coach? But I will say this, all good things have to come to an end at some point. But regardless, this is not an easy day for people that cover the team. It's not an easy day for fans who have been supporting this team. Even if you believe that it is time for a new head coach, it's not easy, because you're talking about the winningest coach in franchise history. You're talking about an incredible human being that really poured his soul into everything, whether it was philosophy, scheming, culture, being able to build that locker room that really was ironclad for most of his time here in Seattle, and just being able to have different iterations of rosters and being able to stay competitive and make the postseason. As I mentioned earlier, this is a bittersweet moment for everybody that's involved. At the same time, there is some excitement when you're looking towards the future here. And Pete Carroll being able to make this decision now, being able to move the advisor role, I think that he could sense, hey, this is the right time to make this change too. He's still going to be involved in the organization, which I think is great. Having him around is going to be able to keep that culture that you've had in place set. And he's going to be able to still do some things behind the scenes to really help out this football teams. But nonetheless, it is still a bittersweet day. And we're going to be talking a lot about the memories of Pete Carroll and all the great things that he accomplished here, which he deserves. Best coach in franchise history, one of the best coaches of his era. He deserves all those accolades. And this provides an opportunity for us all to really reflect on the greatness of Pete Carroll as Seattle begins to transition into a new era for the franchise. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to follow and subscribe Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We'll have a second show coming later today. I'll be teaming up with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and we will dive deeper into the decision to move on from Pete Carroll as coach. We'll look at some clear candidates that should be front runners or should be considered, maybe some sleepers that haven't been mentioned as potential replacements for him, and much more. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday afternoon as this breaking news continues to be combed through. Go Hawks.